Hello everyone, welcome to our online lecture today on federal taxes, federal spending, and our introduction to fiscal policy. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's start off with, who do we pay taxes to? I think we all understand that taxes obviously are something kind of like one of those necessary evils. But I think a lot of people are unclear as far as like how much do we pay in taxes and who do we pay taxes to? Okay, so within the United States, there's obviously different levels of government. That's called federalism. The most, I guess, the government that we probably have the most interaction with is our local government, and usually we pay property taxes to the local government and user fees. Okay, so if you live in a house or an apartment, you either directly or indirectly pay taxes to the government on your property. There's also typically user fees that go along with that. For instance, you might pay user fee for garbage collection or what have you. Okay, state government, we pay income taxes to and sales taxes, meaning that whenever you get a paycheck, a portion of your paycheck does go to the state. And also, whenever you make a purchase at a store or a restaurant, there's usually a sales tax that also goes to the state government. The federal government also taxes us, and they tax us through our income. So, depending on how much you make, there's certain taxes on our income. There's also what every American pays, and that's a payroll tax, and payroll taxes support Social Security and Medicare programs. There's also excise taxes, which, for example, tax on cigarettes is often used as an excise tax. There's also state taxes. Okay, so those are the variety of taxes that we pay and who we pay them to. Okay, now a great question is, what gets taxed and how do we get taxed? Okay, so usually when you're talking about taxes, there's some terms that you should know. Okay, for instance, when someone says tax base means that's the stuff that the government can basically tax. Okay, so whenever you hear that word, that's just referring to, okay, the government can go ahead and tax this. Okay, now there's different tax structures that exist or can exist in our country. I guess we can decide if we want to have them or not. And some states might have a variety of these taxes. Okay, one tax is called the proportional tax. This is also known as the flat tax. Okay, and under this kind of tax, everyone would pay the same rate no matter how much you make. Okay, and so that's a tax that typically is brought up a lot by Republicans recently in the 2012 election. There's a lot of Republicans that supported that, so that whether you're poor, middle income, or rich, everyone pays the same percentage. Okay, there's progressive taxes. Okay, and this essentially means that the more money one makes, the more that money gets taxed. Okay, and if you did the budget project this year, you probably know a little bit more about this than anyone else does. But if you look at the tax brackets on the right, you can basically see there's 2011 and 2012. You can basically see how the tax rate works. So, for instance, looking right up here, the first $8,700 that you make, that gets taxed at 10%. So no matter who you are, whether it's you're working at Burger King, whether you're a teacher at Waukesha West, or whether you're Aaron Rodgers, working for the Green Bay Packers, everyone's first $8,700 is taxed at 10%. Okay, and then if you make more money, that gets taxed at a little bit higher rate. So the money that you make that's between $8,700 and $35,000, that's taxed at 15%. If you make more than that, that money from $35,000 to $85,000 is taxed at 25%, and so forth. Okay, and so it's kind of a fair system in that everyone pays the same tax rate on the money that they make. But what it does do, this progressive tax, is that it does tax wealthier people at a higher rate. Okay, so you can see that in 2012, 35% is a tax rate for if you make more than $388,000. Okay, so anyways, that's how the tax brackets work. Regressive tax is basically a tax that hits lower classes. So regressive tax, a great example of a regressive tax is a sales tax. Okay, a sales tax is regressive. So those are essentially the tax structures that we have or can have in this country. Okay. So here's a cool graphic. It shows us where your federal income taxes went. Okay, so this does not include your payroll taxes. The payroll taxes pay for Medicare and Social Security, but these are just your federal income taxes. Okay, and you can kind of see like where our federal government spends, every dollar that you pay in income tax. So you see like every dollar you pay, 26 cents goes to the military, 20% goes to healthcare, 13 cents goes to interest on the federal debts, and 12% or 12 cents, excuse me, goes to unemployment. And so it kind of breaks down, like I said, where your dollar goes. Okay, and this is just your federal income tax. So once again, when you do get a paycheck, you pay income taxes, but you also pay payroll taxes. So Social Security and Medicare aren't included in this little cool graphic. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about federal revenue. Okay, so here's how the federal government gets its revenue. Okay, the types of taxes that our federal government has: income tax, which I briefly just talked about. That's money you have to pay from your income. There's the payroll tax. Those are taxes that basically support Social Security and Medicare. Corporations pay taxes as well. There's the excise tax, which is, like I said, kind of on cigarettes and other items like that. And the estate tax, tax on the assets of the rich when they die. Okay, so if you look here, it's a nice little graphic. I know it's a little dated, but it's such a nice graphic that I just want to keep using it. But basically, you can see the sources of federal tax revenue from the fiscal year 2010. Okay, so you can see this is where the federal government got their money. Okay, or got their revenue. Okay, so 42% of it came from income taxes, 40% came from payroll taxes, corporate income tax 9%, excise taxes 3%, and then others 6%. Okay. So essentially, I guess kind of break it down a little simpler. These payroll taxes here come out of your paycheck. An average American comes out of their paycheck, obviously. And then 42% also comes out of your paycheck. So like I said, this is where the government gets most of their money is from us. Okay. So anyways, the government gets all this money and they obviously have to spend it. Okay. And there's two types of federal spending that I want to look at just real briefly. Okay. The first kind is mandatory spending. So mandatory spending is spending that the government has no choice in. By law, they have to spend this money, okay? And these are the big programs, okay? The big three: Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are three very big government programs that no matter who the president is, no matter what political party is controlling the government, this money has to be spent, no questions asked. It's not an option, okay? There's also discretionary spending. Discretionary spending is spending that the government has a choice in. Okay, and the largest section of that spending is defense. So recently, we've had a little bit of a recession, starting in 2008, and as you guys just did your project on, you can see the economy is slowly recovering. So you can see the 2012 breakdown of our budget. Okay, here's our mandatory spending. So here you see this dotted line. Below this dotted line is our mandatory spending. So you have Social Security, you have Medicare, you have Medicaid. Interest on the debt is right here, and then other mandatory spending as well. Okay, and then above this dotted line is our discretionary spending. And you can see how much defense takes up, and then non-defense is right here as well. Okay, so here's the interesting thing. Here is how much money we brought in over here in revenue. Okay, and it kind of breaks down, where those sources came from. But the bottom line is this, guys, is that our mandatory spending almost included all of the taxes that we brought in. So if we were not to run a deficit, meaning that if we just basically spent the money that we had, we would have had to cut a significant chunk of our military spending, probably 75%, and also cut pretty much almost all of our non-defense discretionary spending. Okay, so that means cutting like NASA and money to education and all this other stuff that we spend money on, research and development. Okay, and so that means that because we only brought in $2.6 trillion in 2012, and our government spent $3.7 trillion, that means we had to borrow in 2012. Our government did. We had to borrow $1.1 trillion to basically make our payments and to keep the government running. Okay, and that's mainly because like I said, like you guys saw from the data, that in 2008 we took this really big hit in our economy and we're still kind of recovering, okay? Yet the cost of everything else continues to go up. So anyways, some pretty interesting data here on federal spending, okay? One of the big concerns with the future here is that many of our major government programs are on the rise, okay? So for instance, Social Security is on the rise. You can see that that'll take up a big chunk of our federal budget in a little bit. We also see an increase in the interest is going to go up, Medicare is going to go up, and also Medicaid is also going to go up. Here you can see some of the fastest growing entitlements. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. You can see the data from 2002, and you can see the increase that those have had in 2012. So for instance, Social Security has gone up 36%, Medicare has gone up around 70%, and Medicaid also is kind of knocking on the door for 40%. So from 2002, when President Bush was in office, to 2012, when President Obama has been in office, we can see that these mandatory spending items have been growing at an incredibly fast rate. And once again, this is mandatory spending, meaning that President Obama or the Republicans in Congress or the Democrats in Congress, they have to make these payments. There's no choice. Okay? And that's one of the major reasons why we're having this, I guess, this debt crisis, is that these entitlement programs are growing so fast. Okay? So anyways, getting to fiscal policy. So exactly what is fiscal policy? Fiscal policy is basically the use of government spending and the collection of taxes to influence the economy. So it's kind of like monetary policy. Monetary policy is when the Fed tries to influence the economy. Fiscal policy is when the federal government tries to influence the economy. Okay, so for instance, and by the way, I should have mentioned before, there's videos throughout this lecture, and when we get to the videos, I'd like you to stop and go ahead and watch them. The links are provided on your assignment page there. But fiscal policy is made through the federal budget. Okay, so the federal budget basically is a plan for the government to basically use its revenues to basically spend on the programs that it wants to. Okay, so basically three kinds of budgets you can have. You can have a balanced budget, which basically means that government revenues are equal to government spending, which doesn't happen very much. You can have a budget surplus, which means that government revenues are more than government spending, and we haven't had those since President Clinton was in office in the late 90s. And you can have a budget deficit, which means that government revenues are less than government spending. And for the most part, that's the way it's been the past, I don't know, forever, is we typically don't have budget surpluses. Okay. Ideally, though, it's okay for us to have a deficit, so long as the deficit's not like, a huge deficit. So obviously the last deficits that we've had in the last couple years have been, pretty severe. As long as we don't do that all the time, that's okay. We can handle it because our economy is going to grow and we can handle the debt. But there have been times in our country's history where we did have to run these huge deficits. For instance, like during World War II or the Civil War or this last recession, we've had these massive deficits. Okay, and like I said, for the most part, our country's wealthy enough that we can handle that. So long as we don't continue the trend, that's the concerning thing. Okay, so please go ahead and pause my lecture, watch that video. It's only about 2 minutes long, and it's a great little, video on the federal debt and how that works. Okay, so just like the Fed can have tight money and easy money policies. The fiscal policy also has two things that are very similar. The first one is contractionary policies. So sometimes the president and Congress are going to look and say, you know what, we need to slow down economic growth. Inflation is becoming too much of a problem, and so they can institute what's known as a contractionary policy. Okay, so that means they're going to lower government spending. Okay, because once again, the government spends a lot. The government spends a lot of money, whether it's buying things from the private sector, what have you. They can basically slow that spending down, and that's going to put less money into the economy, and that can then hopefully reduce inflation. They also can tax people at a higher rate, which means people are going to have less money to spend, and that also can slow down, inflationary fears. We also have expansionary policies. Expansionary policies are policies that encourage economic growth, and so the government can increase spending to increase demand for products. They can cut taxes, okay? So people have more money to spend, and hopefully that will mean businesses are expanding because people are spending more money, and then more workers will be hired, and then they'll start spending money, and then hopefully that kind of leads to economic growth. But typically when you do an expansionary policy, you're going to do what's known as deficit spending because you're slashing taxes, okay? Allowing more people to have money to spend on goods and services, but you're also bringing in less taxes, which means that you're probably gonna have to borrow your way through this. Okay, so anyways, there's one last video that I want you to watch for those of you who are John Green fans. It's a cool little video, 6 minutes long. I'm not going to require this one, but I do want you to watch those first 2 videos in the lecture. And if you have time, this is a really cool lecture that many people like John Green, so you might find it interesting. So anyways, hope this helped.